Hey guys, welcome. Hat Tuesday number 35, Hat Tuesday number 35, and we already have a guest on, so let me just bring Robert onto the stage. Hello, Robert, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, my friend. I love the hat, by the way. What can you tell us about the hat you're wearing?
Um, it's um, it's it's a rescue hat.
All right.
Um, I take great great pleasure in rescuing hats from the dumpster, and
Mm,
probably my very best customer, a mad hat collector. He's since stopped collecting, and he's kind of morphed into uh, the the buying and selling of vintage hats, and he
yeah,
scours, looks for bargains, and then he cleans them up and resells them, hopefully for a profit. But
yeah.
he was always on the hunt, and he would buy I don't know what you call it, like job lots of hats, and the ones that were of no use to him, he'd send to me.
Yeah,
And so a lot of times they were scrap, but once in a while there was a gem.
yeah.
And so this is it's a vintage resistol,
Ah, love it.
and it's um, one of my favorite hats. It fits me perfectly,
Yeah,
and it's cleaned up really nicely. It's got a I reversed it when I cleaned it up and reblocked it, so the back is now the front, because there's a
yeah.
in the very back there's a weak spot,
I see.
but it's in the back, so I can't see it. So if I can't see
Yeah.
it, it doesn't matter, right?
That's right. That's right. It doesn't exist. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, yeah. So I've
Well,
got a bunch of these, and I just take great pleasure in kind of resurrecting them.
yeah, yeah. And I know you mentioned before about like going through some toads if you're in the vintage game. I definitely understand that in terms of because that's really fit is one of those things where um you really have to go and dial that stuff in. I mean, obviously that there's variances in the manufacturers. Obviously, we know that hats shrink over time. So there's so many factors kind of working against you. Um, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to try to incorporate that into the it can either be fun or frustrating,
Yeah,
you know.
I I think if it depends on I mean, I guess as does anything, on your mindset. If
Correct.
you treat it as part of your hat education, um, then there's no bad purchases, because
Right.
you learn something out of every one. But if you're of limited um, discretionary income, and you're looking
Yeah.
for the score, the get that,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly frustrating, because oftentimes you're buying a hat. I mean, this pertains to eBay, I think, most, and then there's Etsy.
Yeah.
Um, you're a lot of times you're dealing with, on the bargain side, you're dealing with people, like, they're selling a hat, but they're not hat people either.
Right.
So, like, not to cast aspersions on their character, because a lot of
Yeah.
times, um, in the true sense of the word, they're ignorant.
Right.
They don't know. They don't know a hat, so they don't know how to describe it. They don't know what to look for,
Right.
and that's where the danger is, because you're buying something that might be described incorrectly, or um, all of those things. And so what you get is it doesn't match what you hoped you were getting.
Correct.
um,
Correct.
and then the other side of that is, if you're buying from a um, like a hat guy, a collector, he's likely the guy that is gleaned the good buys,
Right.
cleaned them up, and is now reselling them for a profit. So,
Right.
um, I mean, oftentimes it's a fair deal, but it's not a screaming deal, because
Yeah.
he's got the profit built in. However, he's a hat guy. He has a seller's reputation to uphold, and so
Right.
you can be assured or more assured of getting a good hat.
Right.
You've paid
Yeah.
for it, but there's no disappointment there.
Yeah, you're less likely to get your hat in an envelope, which
Yes.
again, it's like one of those things that you're like, wow, and again, folks, I guess are well intentioned. I want to say they're like, okay, this will flatten out. They'll save on postage, but and if all they had to do was ask, right, and say, hey, this is how much it's going to cost to get it to you. And I think more often than not, folks are willing to, to spring a little bit more, right?
Yeah, yeah. If the conversation is put on the table, then it's like, well, yeah,
Yeah, I don't want my Hamburg in an envelope.
yeah. But that's what I mean. I was never a I don't know quite how to articulate it, but I was never like a serious vintage um, collector.
Yeah,
Like some people are like they're really into collecting Stetsons, and you
right.
talk to them, and it's like they know Stetson hats, right? They can cite
Yeah,
all of the detail, the minutia of Stetsons, or or they want to collect a hats of a certain era. I was always just more eclectic, and I always just bought hats that looked interesting.
yeah,
And so I have a very eclectic collection that sort of makes no sense at all, other than
right.
they're all hats that I like.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
mean,
I
for me, I definitely wanted to stick into like kind of a rubric. I obviously learned a little bit about the major, hat companies. And when I saw something, I knew, like I said, if it pulled that lever for me, then I was going to go and make the push. And they're all, and it's a variety of reasons, but defining how the parameters of how you want to collect, I think it's a helpful thing.
yeah, and then the other thing, and this was the expensive lesson, was was um, learning learning the questions to ask.
Right.
And it's like in the beginning, it's the classic, I didn't know what I didn't know, so
Right.
therefore I couldn't ask questions to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And then, but I did learn, particularly on eBay, to ask uh, lots of questions
Yeah.
and document the answers so that if the hat didn't show up as described, um, I could return it.
Right.
And if as long with eBay was great. I mean, eBay really does, or they did. I haven't bought on there in a long time. They
Yeah.
really do lean towards supporting the buyer as opposed to the seller. And but as long as I was able to back it up by saying, "Look, the seller told me this, and here's a
Right.
picture. This is what I got," and they would
Right.
say, "Yeah, send it back." It's a
Yeah.
hassle, but at least I didn't get stuck with.
Yeah. You
Uh,
cover yourself.
yeah, yeah, because I mean, it was um, hats with odors that just can't be removed,
Right.
or um, I guess the classic, and I'm not the only one that's ever had this happen to, and it was probably a Goodwill. The seller, it was a Goodwill purchase, but there
Yeah.
was an actual punch hole in the crown of the hat or in the brim where they'd
Right.
attached the price tag.
Right.
So some clerk had come along with their punch gun and left a permanent hole in the hat,
Yep.
and that wasn't disclosed. It's like, well, it kind of should have been.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I just
Great.
eventually got tired of that, and it's like, um,
Yeah.
I still do buy vintage hats if one comes along that really catches my eye, but I only buy from. I'll pay the premium because I'll only buy
Yeah.
from kind of accept known sellers. People that I
Right.
know, or people that I know are, that's what they do. So I know I'm getting a quality hat.
All right. Well, I mean, we have a great discussion lined up. This will kind of piggyback our discussion from last week, where we kind of talked. We mainly focused on kind of telling the difference between the various types of kind of off the shelf. I would say hats, right? And then it kind of really perfectly complements today, this week's discussion. Nathan says hat broke. Yeah, understood. Nathan, shared that he gave away, one of his hats, the red. I'm going to call it the Carmen Sandiego hat. But hopefully whoever got that, loves it just as much. And he's now working with Paul to kind of replace, I guess, the red hat. So Nathan, rest assured, I'm sure you'll have another fine red fedora in your in your possession soon. But yeah, this week we're gonna discuss kind of how to tell, what are the features of a well-made custom hat, right? I mean, this really dovetails into the notion of hat quality. Robert, I know you shared some notes, and we'll just we'll go along lines through there. I'll open the stage for you, Robert, and how you want to tackle this.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was funny this morning. I was going over my notes, and I thought, well, the one big oversight is that in my notes there's no discussion on just what constitutes a custom hat.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, it would make sense to start there with at least with my definition.
Yeah.
Of what is a custom hat. And it's interesting. I moderate a Facebook page for custom hat makers and collectors and just fans, people that are interested in them. And I posed a question a few weeks back in that, like, when you commission a custom hat, what are your expectations? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
And I think it in my mind it's fairly simple. I like the word bespoke.
Yeah.
To the dictionary, and generally the bespoke speaks to like having a suit made, going to a tailor and having him make you a suit. But it applies to hats. And here's my definition: is that a true custom made hat fits the meaning of the word bespoke. It's a hat that is designed and fitted exactly to an individual's unique size and shaped head.
Right.
The client chooses all aspects of it, much as one would choose suiting material: the felt, the color, the trimmings, the style, the profile, the proportions, all of that in consultation with the hatter, just as he would if he was going to a tailor and having a suit made.
Right.
So I think the word bespoke is a better fit than custom, because custom, I think we've touched on this before, where it's like you can actually buy a factory made hat, but then have the trimmings customized to your taste. So I guess that's kind of akin to this, because in the suit world, I mean, I know I have had custom made suits, but what they are is like they're still made in a factory,
right?
But they do allow for certain weirdnesses of my body shape.
Yeah.
But it's not bespoke.
Right.
It's customized to a degree, but it's not fully bespoke. But I like the word custom, because the word bespoke is a bit, I don't know, arcane in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other thing is defining a base distinction between the factory-made, mass-produced hats and custom-made. And I was thinking about this. It was in my notes that I've never talked to a factory person, so I stand to be corrected. But in my mind, factory hats are designed and produced to hit a price point.
Right.
It's kind of worked back from the price point, whereas a custom made is made with the prime focus on quality of components, meeting the customer's specifications, and fulfilling their desires. So it's kind of like coming at it from two different points of view, whereas the factory made hat, picks a price point and works back from that, whereas the custom hat works up, and then the price is the price.
Right. Right. And we had a great question here from Nathan. And he mentions, what would you call a factory hat that has been customized?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And this is where it becomes a gray area where the word custom is, in a sense, isn't specific enough, because
Right.
you could make the argument, well, yeah, it is customized, at
Right.
least to a partial extent, for the trimmings,
Yeah.
but maybe that's the
And
maybe
maybe that could be the distinction, right? Custom versus
customized.
bespoke. Because in
Yeah,
my word, bespoke is kind of, it really hits on that true definition of, hey, it's kind of like in the suit. There's you have bespoke, and then you have made to measure, and
oh, right.
something like that. And maybe made to measure would be something that could be borrowed from that kind of that world, because it does kind of a little bit speak to that same spirit, so to speak.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I think that's why this program is a good one, because it actually puts it on the table, because there are gray areas,
Yeah, yeah,
and it does pay to be more specific, because one man's custom bespoke hat is not the same as a factory made customized hat.
right,
And
correct.
I just thought of another, not so much now, but back in the day when I had a career, and I was wearing suits, I
Yeah,
was I could go. I was a 42 tall, and I could go into a menswear store, and I could buy a 42 tall, and with some minor alterations, it
right.
fit me. It was brilliant. So I didn't need to spend the extra money to get the bespoke suit.
Yeah,
Off the shelf fit me really well. Whereas I know guys that couldn't do that. Or
yeah,
if they did buy the off the rack one, it kind of looked like an off the
right.
rack suit.
Yeah,
And I think the same holds true in the hat world. That if you're you know, say if you're a 58 regular, 58 regular oval, you can buy yourself an off the shelf hat,
right,
and it's going to fit you.
right.
If you're a 58 and a half long oval, not so much. you know
Correct.
or if you have an irregularity to your head, because um, my head shape tends to be ovoid. It's egg shaped. It's broader
Right,
back, and it does come to a bit of a prow at the front. So um, I guess more pear shaped than egg.
right.
Um, so a regular oval off the shelf hat it does not fit me. So I went through a large portion of my life as a hat wearer, um,
Right.
wearing hats that were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same. If you're a standard size, and you're okay with that, then yeah, you have the luxury of going into a store, buying a hat, and walking out with a great fit.
Right. Right. And we have a question for you, Robert. It says, so Lionel, who actually complimented your voice earlier, said you had a great speaking voice, and you should be on radio. So
That's great. I have a face for radio.
I love it. I love it. But Lionel does say, he's like, what does Robert think of the argument over the Indiana Jones hats between the various makers, Herbert Johnson, Ad Vintage, John Penman? Who's the best in your opinion?
I Okay,
And I know this could be controversial.
this is unusual for me. Um, I don't have an opinion.
All right.
No, I guess it goes back to, I was never a big fan of the Indiana Jones franchise.
Yeah.
I think I've seen a couple of them, but it just never
Yeah.
never spoke to me. So and when I did in my hatting career, I've made exactly one Indiana Jones hat,
Yeah.
and that was it was actually was one of my first, and it was uh, at request, and it was my version of it, and he was fine with that because he wasn't a because when you dive into it, it is I think the word arcane really applies because
Yeah.
I'm amazed because the hat changes not just movie to movie, but
Right.
scene to scene. So people will commission an Indiana Jones hat referencing the movie and the scene. Like,
Correct.
and it's like, so I'm in many ways the Indiana Jones hat makers are uh, they amaze me because they have this eye to
Yeah.
detail. But having said that, I'll get to your question, Lionel. I promise. um, there's a lot of banditry out there in that. I mean, I think it applies anytime there's anything popular. There's going to be those that jump on the bandwagon
Yeah.
and take advantage of the popularity and produce an inferior product and perhaps sell it at an inflated price.
Yeah.
Um, but there are so to go back to your question, Lionel, it's like I'm not really qualified to say who the best is,
Yeah.
but there are a number of hatters on the custom hat maker page that are um, specifically Indiana Jones hat makers.
Yeah.
And they show their product, and it's good stuff. It's like
Yeah.
they're good hatters that have chosen to produce the Indiana Jones genre hats. If they'd have chosen classic fedoras,
Right.
they'd be producing good classic fedoras. Like they're good hat makers that have
Yeah.
chosen this pathway. And I think there's two that I think of that are um, uh, there's Claudio, and his last name. He's based in Italy, and he
Yeah.
does great work.
Like Pellerito or something like that.
Claudio Pet. It starts with a P.
Yeah. I want to say Pellerito or Pellerito.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's another one. His first name starts with an M, and his last name is Attella. And he's relatively new, but the quality of his work is really good.
Yeah.
And I suspect that they would be cheaper than the Herbert Johnson.
Right.
But having said that, like I own a couple of Herbert Johnson other hats, and it's like they make a fine hat,
Right.
So I'm sure that if you bought one of their indie hats, you'd be well pleased with it. And then the other one is the you mentioned his name. He's the guy.
Penman.
Penman, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you certainly pay for the name,
Right.
but you are getting a quality product.
Right.
This goes back pre-COVID. My wife and I, we traveled a lot. We had a motorhome, and
Yeah.
we were in coastal Oregon, and there was a guy and his wife my age, and he always wore a fedora. So one day I wandered over and said hello to him, and hats are a great conversation starter.
Yes.
And it was a Penman hat
Yeah.
that was 15 years old and unusual for a hat guy. This was the only hat he owned.
I love that. Yeah.
And he said, I have worn it every single day for the last 15 years.
Wow.
And he says, I did send it back and get it refurbished once.
Yeah.
But the hat still looked, it looked good.
Yeah.
So what can you say about a hat that's been worn every day for the last 15 years?
Right.
And isn't thrashed?
Right. Yeah, that says a lot. That says a lot about everything, about the hat person, right? Chances are he's a big part of why that hat's in such a good shape. But at the same time, hats can actually take a lot more abuse than a lot of us realize.
Yeah,
Meaning they're made to be worn, and I know we tend to baby them a lot, but they're a lot tougher than we give them credit for.
because he
Um,
lived in he was from Vermont, um, and um, like he wore it all through the winter, through
yeah,
all kinds of like this was not a dress hat.
right.
He was an outdoorsy kind of guy, and actually him and his wife were on their way. They were driving in their Land Rover Defender. They were driving down to South America through Mexico, through Central America, and so he was kind of an Indiana Jones
Yeah,
character wearing the hat.
I love
Yeah,
it. I love it. Lionel, great question. Hopefully that satisfied the itch. And then if Brad comes on here one day, I know he's a huge Indiana Jones fan, and maybe he can weigh in for you. I know he's mentioned that on the Fedora Friday that we did on the first Indiana Jones movie. So hopefully you can catch that in the replay, maybe scratch that itch.
it's
Um,
Pellerito,
Pellerito.
Claudio Pellerito. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to Claudio. I've seen some of his hats, really impeccable stuff. So, all right. Well, not to get us derailed, but we were just on the idea of sizing. And you mentioned one thing, Robert, that really stuck out of my mind during our discussions, because it might have been Morgan that mentioned half sizing, and you were like, well, infinite sizing, right? Because that's really to the heart of what you're getting at with bespoke, is that there is no there it's infinite, the amount of sizes that you can kind of, assuming that it's not, it's within your reach of capability, but in terms of shape and adapting, that's really what you're getting when you do the whole bespoke route.
yeah, and I think I am solidly like if you, it's like a bespoke suit. It's like
Right.
if you're going to order a bespoke hat, it needs to be sized to your head,
Correct.
not to the nearest size or even the nearest half size.
Right.
Um, when I commission a hat, I'm a 59, pretty much bang on.
Yeah.
Long oval suits me the best. Um, but I prefer my hats a little on the loose side. So
Right.
I commission a hat to a 59.2,
Right.
59.2. That's dialed in.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen some of your comments. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about a Western weight felt, and it makes perfect sense. It's just something that, again, I learned from hearing some of the discussions, and then obviously watching you, Robert, on the Facebook groups. When you're dealing with that kind of weight, you really have to be even more dialed in on fit, because there's just less room for error, I guess.
And yeah, and mostly it's the because of the stiffness of the felt,
Right.
there's no forgiveness there.
Right.
Whereas my lane is the dress weight fedoras. Um, Probably the most common weight that I work with is like 95 to 120 grams
Yeah.
in there, versus like a full Western weight is like 240 to 280. So you're
Yeah.
dealing with a lot more heft there, and usually a lot more stiffener. So you can imagine that if you don't get the size and the shape dialed in, the hat's not going to feel right. And at least with a dress hat, it will, with wear, it will tend to conform to your head shape at least.
Right.
Western, not so much. It's like it's asking your head to change rather than the felt.
Right.
And
Right.
then when you think about it, I have a friend who's a hat maker who deals um, specifically with Western and a lot of working cowboys.
Right.
And he talks about the importance of nailing the fit, because if you're a working cowboy out on the range, if the hat is too loose, it's going to the Texas wind is going to blow it off. If it's too tight, you're going to be working all day with a headache.
Right. Right.
So and most of his business, because we don't have any cowboys up here, most of his business is online and at distance. So he's developed a methodology of size and shape,
Yeah.
and then he has the ability to dial it in, which
Right.
is my first. If you were about to commission a custom hat, it's the first question to ask is how are you going to determine my size and shape, um,
Yeah.
particularly if I'm at a distance,
Right.
because it's critical, and you also have to be careful because um, just perusing online, there are hatters out there that at least on their online order form, they don't specify long oval or regular
Right.
oval, and it's like if I were to buy a 59 and I would receive a 59 regular oval, it's not going to fit me.
Right. Yeah.
So as a baseline, the hatter has to be able to meet your size and shape wherever it is. And
Yeah.
there's varying, like I don't have blocks in half sizes.
Right.
They're all in centimeters, but they're all full sizes. But
Yeah.
there's ways of finessing it so that that I can, if some if you were to order a 59 2 or a 59 3 for me, um, like it's fairly easy to finesse.
Right.
You don't need blocks in tenth of a centimeter increments because that would be insane.
Yeah.
But at least the hat maker has to be able to offer that. And
Yeah. And what's most common, I guess, Robert, for people to get at a distance, for hat makers at a distance to get that shape. I know we've seen Paul talk a little bit about this, especially when he's worked with Nathan. But I just curious to take your take in terms of what you've seen out there that's most common, and if there's any pros and cons to them.
it's fairly standard depending on when I was ordering custom hats. My preference was always um, to drive down and go to their shop. So I own a
Right.
lot more. I own a lot more custom hats from West Coast makers than
Yeah.
East Coast, because, but there are. This goes back before the 3D printing became
Great.
ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Um, you could buy a um, called a conformateur, but it's
Yeah.
a contraption that determines your head shape, and you could buy them. They were made in Idaho, and they were acrylic.
I see.
Um,
Yeah.
the pretty much the same idea as the 3D ones, printed ones now.
Yeah.
But hat makers, I think the first hat I ordered from Art, it was at a distance, and so he would have a dozen or so of these conformateurs,
Yeah.
and he would mail them out to me, one out to me.
Right.
After I'd given him a deposit, he would mail it out to me. I determined my head shape, came in a custom box, cardboard box, and then I would mail it back to him. So
Right.
it was exactly the same as if I had visited him in the shop.
I see.
When I began, I mean these things were 200 US each, and you kind of need 10 or 12 of them, and I didn't want the expense. So it's like, okay, how can I do this more economically?
Right.
So I came up with the way of there's it's called a flex curve.
A
You buy
flex.
them on
Yeah.
Amazon or eBay, and it's essentially it's a plastic um, square with
Yeah.
lead in the middle, so that it easily conforms, and with the lead it holds its shape.
Yeah.
Um, and I tested it numerous times, um, with against my conformateur, and as I said, the conformateur was 200 US. A flex curve is 10.
Right.
It it produces the exact same result repeatedly.
Right.
So it was like, okay, I've come up with my way.
Yeah.
So I get the customer to buy the flex curve. If they're Amazon Prime, they get it delivered for free.
Yeah.
I reimburse them the $15, or I knock it off their bill, and so we don't have to bother mailing stuff back and forth.
Yeah.
And what they do is they take the shape of their head, and the risk with that would be like in the mailing back and forth that it gets distorted.
Right.
So I don't do that. We just use the flex curve, and then I get him to take an overhead shot of the tracing of the inside edge of the flex curve
Yeah.
with the north, south, east, west dimensions,
Right.
which is exactly what the conformateur gives you.
Love it. Yeah, I love that.
And it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen Nathan, show some of the tracings as well, and I know they use that. He's used that with Paul, so it's interesting that we're seeing some of the the similarities.
And it's not. I mean, it's not unique in a sense, because I know a lot of hatters do that. Like Hornskov will send you a kit, and it comes with a paper tailor's tape, and then a chunk of wire.
Okay.
Same as the flex curve.
Yeah.
But it's not as robust. And then, but with his version, you still have this thing being mailed back and forth across the world. So there's a certain inefficiency to that. So I just stuck with the flex curve. But so the hatter should have, some methodology, similar to that, or at least their own version thereof.
Yeah.
That could accurately determine the shape of your head.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lionel presents another interesting question about going down in size, right? Obviously, this is something that definitely a lot of the sometimes when you're buying off the shelf that you deal with, right? It wouldn't be a custom hat usually, but if a hat's too large, what is the best way to make it smaller to fit? So like going from a 61 centimeter to a 58 centimeter.
I would say don't buy the hat. That's too big a gap.
That is pretty sizable gap.
That hat would likely come down over your brow. I think I do have some hats that are size 60. And I think in terms of like that's the max I will go.
Yeah.
If it's like if I've got a couple of Homburgs that I loved, and it's like they're 60, but I wanted them, and for that it's an easy fix, and that's just putting something inside the sweatband to take up.
Yeah.
And it can
some people use even toilet paper. Other people use some felt. Right. So if you go to like a craft store and buy some felt to kind of ease up.
Weather stripping for doors and windows. It's like there's no end to what you can use.
Right. Right. And it's one of those things where it's like, obviously, as Robert mentioned, there's a limit to how far you want to go. Because obviously at some point I've seen if I try to go too far, I've seen, the sweatband just get way too bulky and it looks just off. And, at that point, and I'll go as far as to say is that maybe if you get a good deal, maybe buy it with the anticipation of rehoming it, right? So if it's something that you think like, wow, that's a cool hat. We've talked about that in the group before about maybe if you buy something that's too large per se, maybe the idea is that you buy that with the anticipation of finding somebody and you could sell it as well, but at the same time, you could also maybe re-gift it to somebody that really, would otherwise maybe not wear a hat. Maybe you create a new hat person.
particularly if they're a 61 or a 62,
Yeah.
because those sizes in vintage are
Oh yeah, those
rare.
are those are really rare. And actually, I think they command a little bit of a premium, those bigger sizes, if you find a vintage hat. So it's one of those things where those are options available to you, and obviously that, like we mentioned, there's some ways to make it to make it smaller, but within reason, right?
Yeah. The other
Um,
along those lines, I think this is a good time to because someone okay my buddy he has an extra long oval head.
I see.
I joke with him that well actually it was his words that he has a head shaped like a racing sloop. It's a little bit broad at the back, but not
Yeah.
overly, but it narrows to a real uh, definite prow at the front. And so and of course an off the shelf hat is likely a regular oval, so he has to go up a couple of sizes at least to get the right north to south dimension.
Right.
So you can imagine, Lionel, because this is true of trying to stuff a hat. My buddy desperately wanted a Winston Churchill style bowler.
Yeah.
But anyone that he ever found in the store, he would have to go up. He's like a 56, but he'd have to go almost to a 59 to get the fit. And you
Oh
could
wow.
almost fit your two fingers into the hat at the temple.
Yeah.
So the hat, while it fit him north to south, like just looking at it, it's like, oh, that's like you might not be able to identify what was wrong, but your eye
Yeah.
would be telling you, oh, that's just off. That
Right.
just don't look right.
Yeah.
So that's the danger of any time if you have to stuff too much in the hat.
Yeah.
It just the proportions are off. It just doesn't look right.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. In my experience, that is absolutely correct. You mentioned here about a band block.
Oh
And
yeah, that's yeah.
yeah. What can you tell us about the band block and why you should look out for that?
A band block and it's something that a lot of custom hat makers offer.
Yeah.
Some they do it as a just as a matter of course. It's part of the process. Others offer it as an extra.
Yeah.
And really, this is once you've gone through the conformateur and determined the shape of your head, you trace the shape of your head onto a plank of wood
Yeah.
and cut it out.
I see. Yeah.
So you have, in a sense, you have the footprint of your head,
Right.
and it becomes two situations. If you have an odd shaped head, or Western hat makers are more likely to do it because the Western is so less forgiving.
Yeah.
And so you cut it out, and then I have a bench sander, and you pretty it up, but the shape and the size is identical to the conformateur. And then when the hat is complete with the sweatband in it, you slip this into the hat.
Right.
And there's a choice of a lot of hatters will keep the band block in their inventory so that when you order another hat, it's there waiting for you. Others, if you have an odd shaped head, will ship the band block with the hat, so you
Yeah.
have something to slip into the hat while it's not being worn,
Right.
and that will keep the hat in the shape that actually conforms to your head. So the next time you put it on your head, it
Right.
fits.
I love
And
it.
as I said, some custom hatters will offer that as a matter of course. Others will there's an upcharge for it,
Right.
but
Interesting.
it is a nice feature, particularly if you are have an oddity in your head shape.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Robert. So we talked about sizing, we talked about the band block, and then obviously the other part of this in terms of custom is the materials, right? The nature and the quality of the materials used. What can you tell us about that, Robert?
Yeah, I think it's again. I'm stuck on the comparison to the bespoke suit, because
Yeah.
just as you would um, go into the tailor and you would look at his bolts of wool, like commissioning a bespoke hat should give you the choice of everything,
Yeah.
the type of felt, the weight, the color, and then the trimmings, everything. That should be a conversation between you and the hat maker.
Right.
Paul and I exchanged a couple of paragraphs yesterday, and it was budget.
Right.
And so um, the question of, as a custom hat maker, would you compromise on quality in order to lower the price to meet the client's budget? And I
Right.
thought that's an interesting question. And how I'd like to frame it is, it's not so much a compromise, but it is fitting, because it's part of the conversation that I have with a client right from the beginning is, what is your budget?
Right.
Because there's no point in me talking about um, beaver felt and with all of the expensive trimmings if he has a rabbit budget. So
Right.
once we've determined the budget, and part of that is, um, to what use are you going to be putting the hat, and then talking to him about like the felt types, the weight, because if he wants uh, if he's an outdoorsy guy and he's looking for a fishing and a hiking hat, then I probably shouldn't steer him to a really lightweight um, dress felt that's going to give him vintage qualities. I'm going to direct him up a little bit more to like a little heavier weight, maybe not necessarily a Western weight, but a little heavier
Right.
weight that will be able to withstand the rigors of wear.
Right.
So it's all part of the conversation, and so it's not so much a compromise as it is tailoring the hat to his needs and his price point.
Correct. Correct.
'Cause within this other thing I said to Paul is that I've got I still have some felts from when
Yeah.
I first started this. So I have felts that I have in the books. They cost me $40, and then I have new ones
Yeah.
that cost me. This is in Canadian dollars, $400.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of latitude between the two ends of the continuum. And then in terms of the trimming, um, when you look at the cost of the ribbon, the leather sweat, the liner, in the overall cost of the hat, they're pretty minor.
Right.
So it's like there's no compromise, because I buy my leather sweats in bulk and I land them here for $10. So
Yeah.
there's no point in me offering a cloth sweat to save a few bucks.
Correct.
It doesn't make any sense to compromise
Yeah.
the quality to save $2. It's like, well, no, if $10 is going to queer the deal, then okay, maybe
Yeah.
maybe this is not a good fit.
Correct.
And the same, a ribbon on a hat, in like the crown ribbon and the bow, it takes a yard of material.
I see.
So even if
Yeah.
you're paying, there are Tim at Pure Beaver sells good contemporary ribbon by the
Yeah.
yard, and it works out to about I think it's like $8 for the yard. So you're putting
Right.
really good quality ribbon on a hat, and it's $8.
Right.
Yeah, you can put polyester on there for maybe $2.
Right.
But if $6 is going to make or break the hat, then again, maybe this is not a good conversation we're having here.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a great question. I mean, Lionel, sorry about this. I know you asked this earlier, but I'm gonna bring it forward for Robert now. Robert mentioned that he collects vintage hats. And what makers does he look for, and what is the holy grail he would love to own?
Like I said, I don't have any real direction to my collection, except I have 5 vintage Borsalinos.
Yeah.
And 3 of them are there. If I were to collapse my collection, the 3 Borsalinos would stay.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything else would go first.
Yeah.
Because to me, and there's probably an argument in there, but to me, I have a 1950s Borsalino that is absolutely pristine.
Yeah.
I paid good money for it. I bought it off another collector that was downsizing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the jewel in the crown, because it is, the craftsmanship on that hat is just, it's exquisite.
Yeah.
And I even have my next 2 are from the 1960s, which theoretically is when the hat quality began to.
Right.
And they're still damn fine hats.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would have to say the Borsalino is number 1 by far.
Yeah.
And then after that, I've got a couple of other. I have a Barbizio Italian Homburg that is, the workmanship on that is just, I think it's from the 60s, and it's just it's exquisite, flawless.
Yeah.
I've never been a huge Stetson fan. I know there's lots of people out there that have great Stetson collection, but
yeah,
the name appeal kind of just, it's like,
right. It doesn't. Yeah.
But I have a couple of, I have a 1930s Stetson Nutria.
Yeah.
That, it's just, I love it. It's kind of, it's another, it's a rescue hat. I got it for free and rescued it because the felt was so nice.
Yeah.
And then I've got a couple of Stetson Homburgs, the St. Regis, from the 50s, and I love those.
Yeah.
They're probably, I have a navy blue one and a gray one, and they're probably both. I'd be hard pressed to get rid of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, great question, Lionel. That's again, I'm always curious to hear about that. Myself, I've talked about this on the channel before about looking for a silk top hat at some point, but again, it's not like I have to go have it. I could have had one, but I didn't want to pay the prices that were asked. If something comes along, and that's at this point, I'm kind of like probably peak hat in terms of quantity. So I'm like, unless it's something I can't say no to, I'll probably keep passing. But you never know, right? When you see it and it falls in your lap, and you're like, you'll know it when you see it. But yeah, let's see here. Jedi says the ROI of ribbon quality or sweatband quality is steep. Cheap is cheap, but to get really good quality doesn't take much more money. So go with quality. Yeah, that to me that makes sense. And we talked about this last week in terms of some of the automobiles industry's decisions when these bean counters calculate for over X million number of units, the cost of cheaping out on this part. But it's, when you think about it, the part does a lot, and they could just, for, we're talking about cents here, not even dollars per se. But again, some bean counter, some actuary is kind of like pulling that out and coming up with this figure. And as the consumer, you're like, wow, that was not worth the headache that it produced from using a cheap piece of plastic over something that was going to last.
Yeah.
To reputation, right? Because that's really what it comes down to. It these little decisions over the course of time, will kind of like injure the brand reputation. But yeah, Rob, I just want to make sure that you had anything else for in terms of trimming, right? We talked about color and material, and then style.
This is, I don't know. It's either a good thing or a bad thing that Paul isn't on the call today, because on this we disagree. But
Yeah.
Ribbon, and it's probably the most misunderstood aspect of ribbon is we use grosgrain
Right.
on hats, and the grosgrain just means big grain, right? They've got the ribs.
The ribs, yeah.
But there's two types of grosgrain. There's the Petersham, which
Right.
has a scalloped edge. It's very, very noticeable.
Yeah.
And then you've got the type of grosgrain that's used on men's hats, which
Yeah.
is woven edge, which is a tight, straight, even edge to the ribbon.
Yeah.
And Petersham, which is used on ladies' hats, it's a millinery item.
Yeah.
And I think because of it's a millinery item, there is way more Petersham out there than there is woven edge.
Right.
Particularly when you get into the area of vintage.
Yeah.
Because the vintage woven edge for men's hats is becoming harder and harder to source.
Yeah.
So for new hatters, it's kind of a constant search, looking for appropriate ribbon. So a lot of hatters just acquiesce and they use Petersham, which I'm a jerk on this. I think that is it's just wrong.
Yeah.
And it's the analogy I use is it's like I bought a couple of linen shirts from China.
Yeah.
I know I shouldn't have. And they're men's shirts and the button's on the wrong side.
Yeah.
I never wear these shirts because it's weird.
Right.
And it's just wrong. I don't feel comfortable.
Right.
It's just my weirdness. And so I kind of hold the Petersham ribbon on a men's hat in the same, it's kind of the same judgment.
Yeah.
It's just wrong.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen you comment on the Facebook groups when you've seen it. And understood. And if it's something where if it's something where somebody's going to practice on, maybe that's one factor. But ultimately, unless you really can't source it, right? And
I do, I'm fortunate because I saw early on when I started hatting that this whole ribbon thing is a minefield, and I had the opportunity to buy ribbon from two retiring hatters, and so I bought a whack of it. So
yeah,
I've got enough ribbon for probably five lifetimes of hatting.
Yeah.
So I realized that I'm kind of in a blessed position.
Yeah.
Kind of indulges my judgment. Because if I was on the outside looking in, I might be forced to have a different opinion.
Right. We are all experts in our own opinion, and this is a controversial question here. I'll let you, Robert, decide whether you want to tackle this. But in his opinion, his meaning yours, Robert, Are there hat makers you would advise to stay away from because they are inferior quality?
It's I guess on two levels. I hesitate to comment
Yeah,
on that because it's kind of a minefield.
yeah,
Because if I do express an opinion, it's more likely to come off as looking bitchy.
yeah. Understood.
And secondly, I'd be loath to comment unless I've actually held their hat in my hand,
Right.
because it's like on the custom hat makers page, um, a, a lot of new hatters will post their work, and it's like, here's my second hat, or here's my third or fourth hat. What do
Yeah.
you think? And it's really, really difficult to comment, because in a well-made custom hat, the differences are small, and they're only exposed on inspection. From from a grainy picture, you can't really tell unless the flaws are so egregious that they just they're in neon, which does
Right.
happen. But a lot of times it's like the devil is in the details around the stitching. The What's the quality of the stitching? um,
Right.
how well is the sweatband sewn in? Is it placed properly? All of these, the little things that separate a great hat, a well-made hat, from a mediocre hat. um, the, the differences are small and hard to
Right.
discern.
Right. Right.
um, the one I guess the one caveat to that is that if I know, like, new hatters, it's like, I mean, all new hatters start at the same place, because the only way you get better is to make hats.
Right.
But how do you make hats when you're brand new? How do you it's the teenage lament. It's like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we can't hire you because you have no experience.
Right.
And it's like, well, then how the hell can I get experience if you won't
Right.
hire me?
You won't hire me.
It's the
Exactly.
same. It's the same for hat makers. So
Yeah.
the hat maker has to find a way to make hats.
Right.
And so if you're commissioning a hat, I would be cautious and ask for, um, like do you have an Instagram page? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have a page where you can show me your work?
Yeah.
Um, and then, if nothing else, um, they'll have to sort of come clean. It's like, well, no, I'm just starting out.
Right.
It's like, well, okay. I mean, that's something. At least they're coming clean
Yeah.
about that. And then, I mean, my when I first started out, and I think this is not that uncommon. In order to make hats, um, was for friends and family, but I would make hats for free,
Right.
and then I would expand the circle. I would, a couple of levels, and I would make hats. And as long as I got reimbursed for my hard cost, if they paid for the
Right.
felt, and like, I was ecstatic, because then I could take that money and buy another, and make another hat.
Right.
And I think that, like, that buys you a certain degree of latitude, slack, because it's like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
you're being upfront. It's like, look, I'm learning, and if you're willing to accept, I will make you a hat for, back then it was like $110.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's a excellent, I think, stepwise approach to try to get that experience under your belt. That way, everybody's getting kind of like getting what they paid for, or hopefully more, and you're able to get that experience, and then kind of ramp it up and reinvest. I love that.
and the other thing that I've seen, and it does bother me, and I'm not sure there's a way around it, but because, like, you watch a video on hat making, and like the internet is is just full of promotional videos on,
Right.
blocking a hat, or any step in the hat making process, and it looks damn easy,
Right.
which is a partial truth, because it is a simple process. It's not rocket science, it's not surgery,
Yeah.
but the part that they don't show, and the part that doesn't show, is in the fine detail.
Right.
And I think new hatters, particularly if they're not hat collectors, and I think this is, I post this on the Facebook page often.
Yeah.
If you want to be a hat maker and you don't own a well-made hat, or even better, a well-made custom hat, how the hell do you know what one looks like?
Right.
Where is your standard? What's the standard to which you are striving?
Right.
And if you're not a hat person, you have no standard. You don't know.
Right.
So this is where the simplicity comes in. And it's like, well, I made a hat. It looks great. I'm ready to sell. I can take this to market.
Right.
And so many new hat makers want to take their product to market way too soon.
Yeah.
And it's the classic, you only get one chance to
Right.
make a good first impression, because they think they've arrived, and it's like, no, they haven't.
Right.
And it does harm to the craft, because if I've commissioned a custom hat and I get one that is not well made, it doesn't stand up, um, I'm not likely to take the risk and buy another one.
Right.
So
Right.
it does harm to us all.
Yeah. Great point. Great point.
So I just to sum that up, I think that if you're going to commission a custom hat, it's like, just do some due diligence and just find out who it is. Like, who are you buying from?
Right. Right. And back to the subject of ribbon, Josh mentioned sometimes it is hard to find the right ribbon in specific colors. I know that probably was, when I asked Paul about the orange, the Mets fedora behind me, it's like, how much orange, because especially in the UK, where orange, I think he mentioned that, like, nobody's asked for this in a long time. You may not have a whole lot of options in certain colors, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult.
And
The
Robert, in terms of stitching, and sewing, what do you want to say on that aspect?
and this is the, I think, it's one of the fine details that separates an average hat from a great custom hat, is the quality of stitching. And this is something that's really, really hard to see just in a photograph. And I talked to you, like, Borsellino as a brand. I've worked on some Borsellinos from the 30s and the 40s,
Yeah.
maybe like the heyday of hat making. And the quality of stitching is just, it's sublime.
Yeah.
And even a well-made hat today can't compare. But
Right.
if you're looking at a custom hat, it's like, check out the stitching on the bow and the crown.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I strive towards is all of my stitches are not visible.
Right.
You should be able to look at a hat and not see the stitching, or at least have to look really hard and
Yeah.
do some investigation before, to find out where are the stitches located.
Yeah.
Because with grosgrain ribbon, it's not, I'm going to say it, it's pretty straightforward. It does require some fine motor skills, which are
Right.
not easy for me, but if I can do it, it's doable.
Right.
Yeah, you see so many hats that And again, it goes back to my complaint about mass-produced hats, particularly Stetson, where you look at a Stetson bow, and there's 4 tack stitches on the 2 bow ends, right? And it's like I'm convinced that they have a machine that does it, just goes,
Yeah.
and it's like you can see it from across the room. And in
Right.
my view, in a custom hat, unless you're doing a festival style hat where the stitching becomes a design element,
Right.
which is that's a totally different thing.
Correct.
The stitching should be invisible,
I love it. I
and
love it.
that's, to me, that's a hallmark uh, of a well-made, like a custom hatter that's at the top of their game.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that it's often misunderstood, and that's the proper placement of the sweatband. And it's something that, again, it's not difficult, but it does require some understanding that the sweatband, particularly the reeded area of the sweatband, needs to sit kind of on or slightly outboard the brim break, because there's the reed, and then underneath that there's the stitching on the reed tape. That needs to be away from your head, particularly your forehead. And if you're drumming the sweatband properly, it will, and if the sweatband is fitted properly into the hat, it will do that naturally. But I see so many, it's a common mistake of new hatters, is that the sweatband sits too deeply into the hat, and that reed area becomes the contact point
Right.
on the skin, and it's the least comfortable part of the sweatband.
Right.
Like you don't want that in contact with the head. It needs to be outboard. So that's another thing to pay attention to.
And then
the last thing is, well, there's actually 2 last things. Do they sew the liner in place, or do they glue it?
Yeah.
And then lastly is, and this is, again, it's something that new hatters don't fully appreciate, that they're, particularly if you're a new hatter and you're only working on one hat, like you want to get on with it, so you'll block the hat, and it'll sit on the block maybe overnight, whereas like the felt needs to sit on the block for a few days. It needs to dry, it needs to set up, and it's something that Optimo, the $2,000 hat guys, they Graham talks about it, and it's the decotizing of a felt. And what they do is they have actually a special chamber that the hat and the block goes into, and it's temperature and humidity controlled over days. And so when the hat comes off the block, it's fully set up, and less likely or not likely to be affected by the weather.
Yeah.
So that if you get a hat wet, it's something that happens with wool hats.
Yeah.
And I think in today's market, it's probably because the wool hasn't been properly decotized, and wool is more prone to tapering, if you get the hat drenched. But it also can happen with fur felt. And so new hatters are, it's like they want to get on with it.
Yeah.
And the downside of that is that might not show up for 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's the difference between a hat that will, last you years versus a hat that will last you a generation.
Yeah. Wow. I just learned something, because I had not come across that term until now, but that it makes perfect sense.
And it also used to be less of an issue because like the factories would produce a felt, and it might sit in inventory for 6 months before it was sold, so it has had time. Whereas in today's world, it's like, they're making them and out the door.
Yeah.
It's like they don't. These hats are not sitting in inventory for 6 months.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's fresh, and it's like it's a small thing in a sense, but ultimately it could be a really big thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it makes, in terms of that process, it's one of those steps that I'm sure it's easy to skip, but the downsides are visible way down the road. It just reminds me of the gentleman you talked about with with the Indiana Jones hat. It's one of those things where I'm like, if you have it for 15 years, you're gonna notice a lot more. I'm like, in the fact that it holds up, all that time. Those could be the little details that that if you don't skip out on them, you get more of those kind of outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're paying, 600-800, I'm not sure what a pen would cost these days, but if you're if you're spending that kind of money, it might seem like a lot, but 15 years down the road, it's like, that was a hell of a bargain.
Right. Correct. When you think about it, right? 15 years, that's a good ROI right there.
Yeah.
And then Lionel's got, man, he's come out on fire. This is probably outside the scope, but he wants to get the take. So we're gonna why have hats fallen out of style? When I see pictures of the 30s, 40s, every man wore a hat. Nowadays, very few wear fedoras.
The quick smart ass answer to that, Lionel. Nobody knows for sure.
Yeah.
I wrote an article, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago for the Hat Talk magazine on that topic.
Yeah.
And so I did my research, and it's like there's all manner of theories why.
Yeah.
But they're all just theories.
Correct.
Because actually this is something I didn't know. The peak hatting years, hatting peaked about 1920.
Yes.
And it's been downhill from that point.
Yeah.
Not the 50s, not the 60s. That's when it became really evident. But the decline started about the 1920s.
Yeah, Brad talks about that in one of the documentaries that I shared. I'm just going to call it an interview. I don't know if you would call it a full documentary, but they had Brad Bowers, who's on this channel, he went into that very same fact that we started seeing this a lot earlier than a lot of folks give it credit for. Obviously, a lot of folks talk about Kennedy, the advent of the car, I myself included. I mentioned that before.
Yeah, that was another theory.
Yeah, but the idea is that we were seeing that downslope several decades earlier, right? It's kind of a slow roll, and then I think we started seeing the death knell, I guess, of the industry in those latter couple decades, the 60s and 70s. And yeah, again, I don't think anyone can pinpoint exactly why. It just happened. I'm sure, again, we talked about hairstyles and hair product and things like that. There's a whole confluence of factors that I'm sure play into it than a simple, hey, it was this.
And I think that's true, I think, of most societal phenomenons. It's like we as a species want to find the reason, and very seldom is there one reason.
Right.
It's a series, it's a confluence of events that slowly happens over time. And then, because Kennedy wasn't the cause.
Right.
He was the most visible symbol thereof.
Right. Correct. For example. Yeah.
Yeah, he was, but by that time, it was a phenomena that was 40 years in the making.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. I love that. I felt exactly the same way. It's like Kennedy wasn't necessarily the cause, but he was just a very prime, visible public example of this deterioration that was happening a lot earlier. So Lionel says, what product would Robert recommend in protecting felt hats or wool hats from the weather? Also, what's the best way to care for hats?
I really can't. I can't speak to wool because I've never owned a wool hat other than the the watch caps or beanies that my wife knits for me.
Yeah.
Um, I store all of my hats in boxes with tight fitting lids
Yeah.
so that they're I think like most houses, we have a forced air furnace
Right.
and we run heat probably 8 months of the year, 7 months of the year.
Yeah.
And our house is quite dusty. So if I leave a hat out for a week, um, it, I know I should brush my hats more often, but if I leave it out for a week, I have to brush it because there's a layer of dust
Yeah.
on the horizontal surfaces. So I keep them all in boxes, and it protects them from um, to a certain degree
Yeah.
from the moths. So um, the dust and the moths, I keep them in a box, and I have to admit, like you, Luke, it's like I do have hats that I baby.
Right.
But then I have other hats that are sort of my sacrificial anodes. So if I'm going out
Right.
and it's raining or it's a possibility of rain, I will wear one of those hats rather than my babies.
Right.
It's like I love all my
You're
children.
knock around.
I love all of my children, but some I love just a little bit more.
Yeah.
But having said that, um, if I've been, we get a lot of rain up here, so
Yeah.
it's not that uncommon to get caught in a downpour.
Yeah.
And I've never had an issue with a hat. It's like when I come home, I just make sure that it's um, it's still in its correct shape, even though it's drenched, and then
Yeah.
just set it gently down on a surface where it can sit for a few days and dry out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Perhaps flip the sweatband out if it's wet as well. Um, but I don't bother doing that, and
Yeah.
it's like um, it's in a sense it's like it's an animal fur, so
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
it's
Exactly. It's a lot tougher than we give it credit for sometimes.
yeah.
All right. Great question, Lionel. Robert, I just want to make sure that there was not anything else. I think we covered everything, but I just want to make sure that you didn't have anything else that you wanted to share on the topic before we close it out.
No, we covered everything.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Robert, I'm going to thank you again for suggesting, the topics. This is something that, again, I've learned a lot. Like I said, I've come across the categorizing. I had no idea. Now I'm going to try to look a little bit more into that. And hopefully you guys at home have felt the same way. I want to thank Robert. I'm going to thank Lionel, who I don't think I've seen on the channel. So welcome, Lionel. I'm going to thank Jedi, Josh, Ian, and Nathan for stopping by and hanging out with us in the chat. And I'm going to leave you how I always leave you, right? It's like a good support these good folks, support Robert. I shared his information. You can find him on Instagram. You can find him on Facebook. I believe you just Robert Galt on Facebook, and you should come across this gentleman. Runs a lot of great Facebook groups as well. And but even if you don't choose not to support these good, fine folks, the one thing you got to do, or we'll get the ghost of Winston Churchill after you with all his Tommy gun glory. But what you got to do is you got to stay hatting, my friend. Have a great day. Ciao, everybody.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you. Likewise, Robert.